So this is a homily for the second Sunday of Lent by Deacon George Kingsnorth. So the readings this week reflect on faith, trust, and authenticity in our relationship with God. And this is particularly poignant in this day and age where it seems to be more about material success than it is about faith. We need to focus more on our faith, trust, and the authenticity that we have with God. This week I watched a couple of movies that seemed to inspire me a little bit. One of them was called Elevation, which is a sci-fi movie, but it was particularly poignant because one of the characters, although a scientist, had a deep faith and was constantly seen to be praying. And they turned out to be Catholic as well, which is very good. Often not seen in movies these days. And the second movie was called The Keys to the Kingdom, which was a Gregory Peck film made in 1944. And that film again showed how the relationship that the main character, Father Francis Chisholm, had with God was what was more important to him than anything else, more so than the material wealth that people wanted to accumulate. And he was judged for this. There was a nun who came out to his mission in China who had come from a very rich family, and she just thought, he's got dirty shoes and he's got dirty nails, he's not dressed properly, he's kind of beneath her. And then also one of the people that he'd grown up with had also gone into the church and had become a Monsignor and was more interested in how many people he'd converted, and also that it was important to get some rich people involved, which wasn't what Father Chisholm was about. He was more looking at the needs of the poor people, and that he was working with them, and would work alongside them and wasn't too afraid to get his hands dirty. So those two stories were very inspiring, especially when you think about the movies that we get these days, which are like the Marvel movies, which are usually about, like Thor is one of the characters, the Amazons, and quite often about the Greek and Roman pantheon religions, which had multiple gods. And those what you see quite often. So our youngsters are being more influenced by the Roman and Greek gods and the Viking gods than they are necessarily about the one true God, as in God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In our reading from Genesis this week, we see Abraham putting his faith purely in his relationship with God, wanting to make sure that he does everything that God wanted him to do, more so than any materialistic or human or worldly, needs. The psalm talks about the Lord being my salvation and light, and therefore my salvation, and there is nothing I should fear. St. Paul reminds us that our citizenship is not so much in the worldly cities or nations. Our citizenship is in heaven, and that we should be aspiring to attain that goal as opposed to any worldly goals. He reminds us that we should be generous, humble, and loving and caring for those that are in need, and not to exploit them in any form or fashion. And that generosity, humility, and love transcends this world's material wealth and brings us closer to God. And the gospel shows Jesus revealing himself, his true nature, the transfiguration, and being changed from what people saw him as a material being into one of a heavenly being, the Son of God, of which God actually reminds the disciples that he is. If we think back to the Father Chisholm story when he was in China, there was a rich man who he'd gone to help his son and saved him, managed to bring him back to health. And the rich man had come then feeling that he needed to repay the priest in some way and wanted to become a Christian. But Father Chisholm said, no, your reasoning isn't right. He says, you don't believe, so there's no point you becoming a Christian until you believe. And he refused him. He said, no, there's no point. And the rich man was kind of a bit confused. He thought, well, look, I need to pay for what you've done. He says, no, you don't need to do anything. There's no obligation. There's nothing. And out of the generosity of his heart, the rich man gave the priest a piece of land on a hill where he could build his church, and gave him the supplies he needed to build his church. So again, that was just through humility. And even when Father Chisholm finally impressed the rich nun, the nun who'd come from the rich family, instead of being sort of judgmental, he was thankful that she'd finally wanted to be his friend, and that meant more to him than anything else. So that kind of spiritual humility and humbleness to not judge and not prejudge anybody was very important. Another aspect which we also see is that another set of missionaries had come to the province that he was in. So he went out there and welcomed them, and they were concerned that he might think they were coming to poach his parishioners. And he said, look, there's plenty to go around. Let's just work together. And that's the way he did it. Again, very humble, and brought about lots and lots of respect. Our modern society glorifies success and accumulation of wealth. But what we must ask ourselves, is this truly what matters in our life? And is that what we put first? In other words, are we glorifying material things above our relationship with God?